we have a sophomore in high school, so preparing for college tuition is top of mind, while maintaining a healthy savings is also important to us. This is where Monarch comes in. Set yourself up for financial success this year in 2026. Monarch is the all-in-one personal finance tool designed to make your life easier. It brings your entire financial life, budgeting, accounts and investments, net worth, and future planning together in one dashboard on your phone or laptop. Feel aware and in control of your finances this year and get 50% off your Monarch subscription with code OFFTHECLOCK. In just a few minutes, my husband and I set up our Monarch and could instantaneously see our spending patterns. With automated tracking and clear projections, we can see now how to reach our financial goals of saving for college and building up our savings account. I love how Monarch keeps you focused on planning ahead and hitting financial milestones. Set yourself up for financial success in 2026 with Monarch, the all-in-one tool that makes proactive money management simple all year long. Use code OFFTHECLOCK at monarch.com for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarch.com with code OFFTHECLOCK.
Caregivers are unnecessarily suffering. They absolutely need more support. And care is not just exclusively a burden. What the science really tells us is that it's certainly not inevitable that care is just bad for you. When done in decent enough conditions, it provides psychological benefits. You can live longer, particularly parents live longer. And our goal isn't to now take all this research that shows that some people do shockingly actually better when they care and say, oh, be quiet, don't complain about caregiving. Our goal now is to take the mixed research and say, hey, care doesn't have to be bad for you. What can we do to make sure that everyone has this experience where their inflammation is actually going down instead of up when they're caregivers?
That was Elissa Strauss on Psychologists Off the Clock.
We are 5 experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, author of Act for Burnout and Act Daily Journal.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and the author of an upcoming book on developing your confidence and social skills.
From Boston, I'm Dr. Yael Schoenbrunn, faculty at Brown University and author of Work, Parent, Thrive and an upcoming book about misunderstanding.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Hey listeners, just a super quick reminder that you can listen to the podcast ad-free by supporting us on Patreon for just $5 a month. Or you can support the podcast with a one-time donation on Buy Me a Coffee. Thank you to everyone who's already supporting us. Be sure to stay tuned to the end of the episode for our co-host discussion of today's interview.
I am so thrilled today to welcome our guest, Elissa Strauss. Elissa is a journalist, essayist, and cultural critic who has been writing about the politics and culture of parenting and caregiving for more than 15 years. Her work appears in publications like The Atlantic, The New York Times, Glamour, Elle, and elsewhere, and she was a former contributing writer at CNN.com and Slate. Her book, When You Care, The Unexpected Magic of Caring for Others, is out now from Gallery Books, and she writes a Substack called Made with Care. Welcome to Psychologists Off the Clock, Elissa.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat today.
Me too. I've really been looking forward to this conversation. My favorite part of doing this podcast is reading a book that challenges a status quo belief and then being able to talk to the author about it. So let's start with what I took away as the premise of your work. And there is a lot of ways to describe your work, but this is what I took away from it, which honestly challenges what I didn't even realize I believed until I read it in black and white. And that is that in our feminist pursuit of pushing back against motherhood as a woman's defining value, we have gone too far in viewing caregiving writ large as a threat to the full development of self. And you argue that this is flawed reasoning and caregiving can enhance and enrich our sense of self.
Yeah, I love that.
Okay, good. Good start then.
Yeah, I'll carry it with me. I'll put it in my pocket.
So what I want to really dig into as we start is what I see as the heart of your book, which is rewriting the cultural narrative around care. For example, we often use the word burden when talking about caregiving, or focus on aspects that are depleting of our resources and or deleting of ourselves. But you present a more balanced narrative that includes the myriad benefits of caregiving. So let's talk about the riches we can experience in a caregiver role. So could we start with what you have gained from becoming a mother to 2 children, which you beautifully document in the book?
Yeah, thank you. So, just to kind of set the scene, when I became a mom, I was living in Brooklyn, literary circles. It was 2012. And motherhood wasn't something that cool, interesting, smart, literary Brooklyn writers embraced. Ambivalence about motherhood or rejection of becoming a mom was definitely what was in the zeitgeist and kind of still continues to be considered you're a little more interesting, sophisticated, right? If you feel ambivalence about motherhood, not ambivalence within the parent-child relationship, we all have that. But I mean, when I say ambivalence, I mean like not wanting kids or not really being into your kids. Like that was the interesting role, right? And I had kids and I didn't quite feel that way. And, I had a moment of like, what's wrong with me? The trad wife language wasn't out there. It's like, I'm not a trad wife, nothing in me. I work, I don't make my own cereal and whatever else goes on. I honestly don't follow them that closely. But what is going on that so much of the women's movement, right, was about women gaining access to places of power and economic security. Wonderful. Love every single one of them. Benefit every day from every single one of those wins. This isn't a either or. This is a yes and. And what about everything that took place in the home? How are we raising that up? And not even just raising it up for the sake of like respect, but also raising it up so we get the proper support we need, because care is this huge, rich experience. And once you open the door, you really see it in its fullness. You realize how much support we all need to do it well and to get to have meaningful, rich experiences with it and not just feel that burden piece.
That's right. And we are going to hopefully get to this whole scope because it's from the individual experience out to what's happening with our social infrastructure and cultural messaging. It's all very tightly connected. And I just want to say that in terms of what we gain from becoming a parent, and you talk about caregiving, I just want to be explicit, beyond parenthood. I mean, this is caregiving for people with disabilities. This is caregiving for the elderly. This is caregiving beyond having children and raising children. But one thing in my personal experience is how you really discuss this kind of transcendental identity shift that was so enriching as you were raising your children. And I relate so much to this. It's like there's deep personal growth through the act of care.
Yeah. I mean, I think, one way I've come to think about it is that, so much of us, especially if we're like meaning seeker types, we wrote poetry when we were 12 and everything else that followed, right? For that type of person, we've been in our whole life in pursuit of like a mirror of the self. We want to really see who we are. We want to understand. And then through that mirror of the self, we're hoping to understand like, what is this thing called life all about? And I think for me, because like many of the listeners, I presume, we were raised in a country or in culture where individualism is like woven through the finest threads in our moral and cultural fabric. I really thought that like that pursuit of the self or the mirror of the self to really see who I was, see life as it is, was going to happen on my own. Something I did on my own. I did not see that it could happen in the context of relationships. And it turns out, in my experience, and I did all those epiphany-seeking things that people do in their 20s, like long meditation retreats and psychedelics and, hiking through jungles, et cetera, and nothing has brought me a clear mirror of the self, a picture of who I am, than caring for my kids. And I feel like this was such a big aha. We don't see care as this like badass way for self-revelation, but it really is. And the thing that's also crazy about care is that's not static. So what I saw about myself in caring for a baby is different than a toddler, elementary school. I have a 13-year-old now. There's some cognitive impairment happening with one of my parents. So that's a whole another mirror of the self, right? And so, I mean, I think it's like if I could create almost like the Instagram, like quick and easy campaign, it's like caring for others is like this badass, crazy punk experience. It's not sweet, sentimental, easy, this Victorian ideal of the angel in the house. It's so raw, so real, so honest. And that is part of what makes it so meaningful. And that's where a lot of the pleasure comes from.
I think when you were talking about the feminism and making all these strides for more power in the workplace, but that becomes like this binary work or home in terms of your worth and value. But the role of self-sacrifice as part of the myth of being a good caregiver, right?
Right.
Instead, we're talking about self-enhancement.
Yeah.
Through caregiving.
Right. And of course, there is a lot of self-sacrifice like inherent to care, but there's really also like, this is where our absolute fixation on independence, individualism, which I really dissect a lot in the book, whether in, psychology, philosophy. I mean, it's so in the water we swim in that we don't even see it really. But once you kind of get out of this idea of independence and you move into this like framework of true interdependence, and again, not the kumbaya version. I think often we hear interdependence, we think it's supposed to just be this like lovely campfire experience. We're all helping each other. No. Like relationships are intense, community building is intense. This is all real work, but it changes how we view self-sacrifice because it stops being something that we spend our lives trying to avoid and starts becoming something that we do with eyes wide open, understanding it's part of life. Like giving to others is just part of the human experience. So what does it mean for us? How can we make it meaningful for us? What are our limits and boundaries? How can we do it well and not do it well? So it's another kind of binary to move away from. It's like, is this, I'm just sacrificing everything that's good about my life to have this kid, instead of like, which sacrifices am I making? Am I making them mindfully? Which ones actually bring me a sense of purpose and meaning and discovery? And which ones just deplete me?
Yeah. So thinking more in the gray rather than this black and white. Okay. We're a science-based podcast. So I want to throw in some data here. And you bring up research about like the longevity of parents and caregivers. Could you say more about that?
Yeah. So I think one of the there's a few first little like mini sparks that I discovered that came together and kind of created this path that led me to this book. And one was the world of philosophy, which we might get to in a minute. But this other one was some of the research that really dug into caregiver well-being. And I think, the kind of top note is that what I discovered is that a lot of times when they do these caregiver well-being studies, they're researching populations that are coming to see doctors because they're having issues. So it's not a neutral population. And then as one scientist put it to me, one researcher, like if you look at the patients of a hand doctor to try to understand how America's hands are doing, they're not going to be doing well, right?
Right.
I think the other thing is that scientific research gets funded to find problems, not to say like, oh, look, they're doing great. So a lot of the research that tells us just how horribly caregivers are doing is a little skewed towards the negative.
Right.
That said, like, I don't want to diminish at all. Like, life is hell for a lot of caregivers in the United States and elsewhere. They need so much more support. The risks of like Medicaid cuts that are happening now, like this is all very real. So we're going to be in the gray here. I don't want to diminish that people are suffering because they're in a caregiving situation, more so elder care than parenting. It's as hard as parenting is. Once you get into the kind of caring for someone with dementia, it's a whole other Olympic-sized ocean of trouble. But I think at the same time, and it's hard. It's hard for us to hold to truths, right? Like caregivers are unnecessarily suffering. They absolutely need some more support. And care is not just exclusively a burden. So when we dig into the science, there's a lot of nuance here. But I think what the science really tells us is that it's certainly not inevitable that care is just bad for you. When done in decent enough conditions, it provides psychological benefits. You can live longer, particularly parents live longer. So it's a far more mixed, nuanced picture. And our goal isn't to now take all this research that shows that some people do shockingly actually better when they care and say, oh, be quiet, don't complain about caregiving. Our goal now is to take the mixed research and say, hey, care doesn't have to be bad for you. What can we do to make sure that everyone has this experience where their inflammation is actually going down instead of up when they're caregivers, right? Because we know it's possible.
Right. So it's optimizing the condition.
Right. Yeah.
And you share some beautiful stories of real people. And one that stands out in this context is, I think it was a husband caring for his wife who had early onset dementia. So there was a long road of this caregiving together. But the way he talked about what he got out of it was really moving. And I think that's what you're getting at, is there's possibility here for that enrichment in that role.
That's Robert Semenza. I found him looking at a comment on the New York Times and him writing about his experience with his wife. I found a whole webpage where it said that he was like running the yacht club in Stamford, Connecticut, or some boating community. Just his phone number, phone called him. And but he ended up being this wonderful source and really should be one of these like cultural heroes because listen, his wife got diagnosed with MS when she was pretty young. Like, that was sad. That was horrible. We're not going to say everything was happily ever after. Not at all. But he was able to do something which is absolutely radical in our culture, which is like realign himself to this dependency kind of marriage, right? Where his wife was going to be really dependent on him and give her, out of love, the best possible life she could have with MS. And also give himself the best possible relationship he could have with having a wife, who has MS. And some of these kind of radical activist things he did, which are very quiet, but just take his wife out in public, even when she was, people are uncomfortable with disability. We still live in a culture that has a lot of just baseline discomfort, right? With someone whose body doesn't quite work or mind doesn't quite work the way we expect everyone's to. He didn't care. He took her to restaurants, he took her traveling. He was very fortunate to have the means to make all this happen. But, I feel like this quiet activism of just normalizing someone with MS in a restaurant, it doesn't just help the person with the disability. It helps the caregiver so much because it strips away the taboo that makes caregivers feel like that once they're in a care relationship, they should just keep it all at home. No one wants the messiness of that dependency in public. And this happens to parents too, right? It's like you shouldn't take your kid to a restaurant because God forbid your kid has a tantrum in a supermarket. It's like, they're 3. They might freak out.
I actually want to point out a metaphor that I really loved that you used in the book. It's not the making of the soup or the feeding of the soup that is horrible. It's the inability to work a job and have time to make the soup, or the fact that one never gets a break from making the soup, and therefore has no time to rest, exercise, or take a restorative break, like eating the soup alone in a quiet room. All of that reminded me of parenting in the pandemic.
Yeah.
But I think you're making this really important point about the conditions of caregiving.
Right. I could wave my magic wand and kind of make a change. It would make it so we never talk about caregiving this easy binary way, parenting or any other types of care, that we understand that there's a lot of burden, and some of that burden is inevitable because it's just hard to care for another person. Unfortunately, the people we don't care for aren't completely like running according to our kind of emotional and practical timetables. Just doesn't work like that, And so there's always a little inconvenience, but we certainly could lessen inconvenience. So if we could able to talk about both the burden and the meaning at the same time, and talk about the opportunities for sheer joy, which happens in all sorts of care experiences more readily and easily with, parenting, and also the fact that it's really hard. And it's also that it feels, go back to it can feel so good to make someone you care for happy, right? Or to nourish them in some way, to put them at ease, to make them feel in place in the world, like they belong and they matter. That is the best feeling in the world, right? I think we can dig into this too, but like we're wired to actually get like a huge, good, positive feedback loop when we make another feel like they matter and belong to the world. But also sometimes, and that's very real, but also it doesn't mean we can endlessly spend our whole lives just making sure other people matter and put them at ease, you know?
Right. Again, the nuance, the balance.
Exactly.
The gray, right.
Yeah.
As a therapist in private practice, I love seeing my clients, but don't love the administrative hassle. That's why whenever I give advice to a therapist starting their own practice, I recommend Simple Practice. Simple Practice is an all-in-one EHR that is HIPAA compliant, HITRUST certified, and built specifically for therapists. I've been using it since I started my own private practice years ago. It helps me streamline everything. I send each new client a link, and then Simple Practice is my portal for consent forms, billing, appointment reminders, even my telehealth video platform. It makes running a practice so much easier because it frees up time for me to do the important stuff, seeing my clients. And I'm not the only POTC co-host who uses it. Emily does too, and Jill uses it to manage her group practice. If you're just starting out or growing your practice, there's also a credentialing service that takes the headache out of insurance enrollment, which honestly can be a huge lift. Simple Practice is trusted by over 250,000 health and wellness professionals, and you can feel that in how thoughtfully it's built for our work. If you're ready to simplify the business side of your practice, now is the perfect time to try Simple Practice. Start with a 7-day free trial, then get 50% off your first 3 months. Just go to simplepractice.com to claim the offer. Again, that's simplepractice.com.
Every group has someone who insists on doing things the hard way. That friend still paying for a subscription they forgot they had, the one refusing to update their phone because it still works. If you're that person, especially when it comes to overpaying for wireless, then it's time to switch to Mint Mobile. With Mint Mobile, you will get the same coverage, same speed, unlimited talk, text, and data, just without the inflated price tag of other carriers. And for a limited time, get 50% off 3, 6, or 12-month plans of unlimited premium wireless. There's even a 7-day money-back guarantee. Ready to stop paying more than you have to? New customers can make the switch today and for a limited time get unlimited premium wireless for just $15 per month. Switch now at mintmobile.com/POTC. That's mintmobile.com/POTC. Upfront payment of $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan required. $15 per month equivalent. Taxes and fees extra. Initial plan term only. Over 50 gigs may slow when network is busy. Capable device required. Availability, speed, and coverage varies. Additional terms apply. See mintmobile.com.
I also want to make sure we touch on how parents aren't actually miserable. There's a lot of research that gets shared in these pithy, short sound bites, how unhappy parents are. But that's not really true. Can you say more about that?
Yeah. So when you dive into the research, all the social science research is very good, but when I say take it with a grain of salt, I'm not casting doubt, but any good scientists will tell you that they're just kind of nudging their way to some truth. No good social scientist or any scientist, right, is going to say like, and now we fully understand this and no more research needs to be done, right? So a lot of the science, like the social science research on parental happiness, comes at it through kind of one particular lens that tends to yield like one particular result. And you can go digging. You could find that parents are happier than non-parents. You could find that parents are unhappier compared to non-parents. You could find whatever you want, just to justify your own, kind of ideas of how the world should be. You'll find it. But what was most interesting to me was 2 things. The first, why were the unhappier parents unhappier? And when there is some great research comparing data from across the world, these big meta-analyses that found that you really can always attribute that back to economic conditions and government support. So that's like the first thing that's helpful. Like, are parents happier, less happy, more, but we don't know, right? But we do know that when they're unhappy, it's because of economic insecurity or because they don't have paid leave or reliable childcare, right? So what we do know, it's the external, not the internal conditions of parenting that is making parents less happy. And the other thing we know about care more broadly, I think I mentioned this earlier, it's kind of like, it's something that you think you're grabbing and it slips right out of your hands, right? It's a very loose, weird concept. Like, what is happy?
Well, and I actually avoid using the word happy because it's also supposed to be a temporary fluid state, like an emotion, not like an endpoint. And so you're going to compare it to meaning. I was going to bring this up and I love this. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's true. And that's why even asking what makes you happier. I mean, it's so silly. And I also think now I have an 8 and 13-year-olds. And, there's some studies that have, I think, shown that parents are happier when they're doing the dishes than when hanging out with their kids. And that might have been true after I spent the whole day alone with a 3-month-old in a dark, small Brooklyn apartment, entertaining a tiny one. I mean, the happiness thing, we change all the time as caregivers. The people we're caring for change all the time. So it's how could I ever put one number on it? Okay, so to shift towards meaning, which I think is the place where I'm most interested in. I hope my work pushes people to really think about in a richer, deeper way, both at a societal level and a really personal level. And that then meaning is what I think care brings to us. And we need meaning. I mean, meaning, again, to go back to what we try to give, I think, to others who we care for, which is a sense of mattering and a kind of sense of feeling like they have a place in the world. We can get that through care. And I don't know, are we happier or less, are we going to use the word happy for that? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But that it is something that when we look at the research, we see that being other directed can make your life a little more difficult, right? It's day to day a little bumpier, but big picture, that's where the meaning comes from, And it's funny, I spoke with Alison Gopnik and she mentioned studies on this. And it's when people are at the end on their deathbeds, what are they thinking about what made their life meaningful? And it's intuitive enough to we'll believe it, right? It's your family or it's your relationships, biological family, chosen family, whatever. But it's the people you dedicated yourself to. And this is we know this intuitively. So how can we do a better job of allowing people to access this part of the care experience and minimize the part that's getting us stuck in this cycle of just talking about how miserable everyone is all the time?
Right. Before we segue right into that was a beautiful segue for me. I have to quote you. You're a gorgeous writer, and I just can't say it better, but I loved this so much. Happiness demands ease where meaningfulness involves friction and growth. So when we're looking at studies, in the gritty day-to-day of taking care of a 2-year-old, right, we're not going to be super happy all the time. But there's still meaning, but there's a lot of friction and growth in taking care of anyone. So I just love that distinction. So let's get into what's happening structurally around caregiving. Could you explain your core concept in the book, Glass Doors?
So this brings us back to feminism, which is where the book begins, and my kind of thinking through how feminism still has a lot of work to do on care. Again, I'm not going to say you did the wrong things in the past because I love having credit cards. But they're right. There was still this idea, the central metaphor for the feminist movement for a long time. Certainly what I grew up with, I was born in 1979, was this idea of a glass ceiling. I think everyone's familiar with it, right? But it's this idea that we have to climb up and we have to break these barriers that keep us from kind of economic stability and economic prosperity, and also kind of political power and agency. And those are all beautiful things, again. But what we're missing there is that it's not just about going up, right? The women's movement was kind of oriented in this way that was about money and political power and good things, but not everything. We also need a movement that's oriented around care, that understands that the value of those homes that all those women left, important work was going on in them too. And I want to stop and acknowledge, right, that it was often women of color coming in and not always being treated well or paid fairly to do that care work and domestic labor that other women were, leaving their houses and becoming these feminist icons and heroes. So the idea of glass doors is that we don't just need to break the barriers that keep us from economic and political power. We also need to break the barriers, our doors, that create this false sense of separation between what goes on in our homes and what goes on outside of our homes. And when you break a glass door, you understand that, let's start with a really simple one. We need paid leave, right? We need the outside, the government, the thing outside our door, to come into our home and give us something so basic, so fundamentally like human as being able to keep buying food and paying our mortgage or rent while we have a new baby or a loved one is dying, right? We need paid time off to care for ourselves when we're sick, not to lose our jobs if we get a cancer diagnosis, right? Or to care for that loved one who has a cancer diagnosis. So that's just a clear example. Like you break the glass door, it becomes much more obvious that we need that outside support to come into our homes and give us that money, just money, right? To be able to afford our lives, to do the care work inside our homes. And then it also goes in the other direction. When we break the glass door, we separate this fiction that a mom has to show up in the workplace and shed any evidence, right, that she's a caregiver. And instead, we have workplaces that not only understand that caregivers need some flexibility and ultimately they benefit from that, but also actually you can bring skills home through care into the workplace. And they're actually quite good for the workplace. And I would say increasingly so with all the technological advances. The ability to relate to another, the ability to really listen and pay attention, right? These are all core skills we hone through care if we're really in the trenches doing it. Attention, receptivity, empathy, all these things that robots, I just don't see them. I think that when they get there, we're really screwed. I'll put it that way, because I think these are the last things we're going to hold on to for a long time. These are traits we hone through care and we could bring actually. So we break the glass door and suddenly, instead of it being a taboo that you're a caregiver or a parent and you're off work hours, it becomes actually something that people see as a great advantage and welcome that. We could see that with politicians for a long time, right? If you were a woman and you're running for office, you often didn't have kids, for practical reasons and others, right? But if you did have kids, you didn't want to be a mom. And now it's no. Actually, Katie Porter, single mom, takes all of her brass, big single mom energy, deep Vinnie Van vibes, right? And brings it to her political work. And we're moms get shit done. So I think that's an example of you breaking down the glass door. We let the world in, whether it's your community or the government supporting the care that's happening in your house. And then we also take this whole care experience and all the way we grow from it and allow us to be proudly using those kind of skills and traits outside the home.
And I do want to give a little shout out to our co-host, Yael Schonbrun, and her book, Work, Parent, Thrive, where she really gets into how to generalize skills from work and home to work. So that's a good supplement. Yeah.
I love Yael. I'm going to get that book for this, yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about how men fit into all of this. What's important about the male caregiver's role in our conception of caregiving?
Yeah. So since we went in a science direction, I think the science is such a cool place to start. And I'll give a shout out to my friend Darby Saxby's new book, Dad Brain, that's coming out next year. And I write about her research and others' research. But this is something we know through some deep scientific, biological neuroscience research, is that men are shaped by care. I mean, for one, there's testosterone drops when they're active caregivers of new babies. So right there, we see that actually men have a care drive, just like women. I actually just pitched a book on the care drive in animals. And sometimes when people say there's no maternal instinct, I'm yes, and actually there's a care instinct in all of us. Right. And I have right now, under this table I'm talking to you on, there's a fluffy golden doodle who we all love because they look just like human. I mean, they have the big eyes and little faces like human babies, right? When you go to a kitten or a puppy, that's your care instinct set off, right? So men have it. There's actually also a paternal instinct, and men have this drive to care. Like all of us, they need to do the care to become the caregivers. This is, I think, this is one of the myths that hurts moms, is that, and I think this is why people take issue with this notion, the way we think of maternal instinct, right? Is that moms just naturally know exactly what to do when the baby's born, and dads are clueless. No.
And then they should do more.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
In fact, both are clueless, particularly because each kid's just so different, So good luck. And everyone makes the path by walking, moms and dads alike. So that's so important for everyone to understand, is men really, they can do this. They may not, may not do every little birthday party planning design scheme exactly how moms want, there's some gaps still, socialized, cult, and otherwise, but they can do it, and they also get really great meaning from it. And the other big thing to note is like they are doing it. So if we talk about caregivers to old, ill, and disabled individuals, 40% of those are men. Not all of them call themselves caregivers, which is, I think, a problem because the more that people identify, the more that they kind of mobilize politically or push for change in the workplace. So if you're a man and you're listening, please identify as a caregiver if, in fact, you are caring for another. And we see dads doing way more care than their fathers did, and way, way more care than their grandfathers did. And yes, also moms are doing more care as well. So moms are still overall doing more care. But if we compare dads to moms, we still have a lot of work to do. But if we compare dads to previous generations, we have overwhelming evidence that dads can do this whole care thing, that they're doing it well, and that they like it. And I walk around my neighborhood, and I've lived here 8 years, and I feel like every 2 years I see like more and more dads with strollers in the middle of the day. So like it's happening. We see it.
Yeah. And we had on Ruth Whitman last year to talk about her book, Boy Mom, about problems with she calls them impossible masculinity norms.
Yeah. She's a very good friend of mine. I may have even helped come up with that phrase.
Well, credit where credit is due. I love the phrase. But I think you touched on in your book, there's some evidence that the act of caregiving actually helps counter the unhealthy part of masculinity norms for men.
Yeah, I think it's so important. I see this so clearly with all the men in my life, from my husband to my 2 older brothers, to my dad, to my brothers-in-law, and so on. You know, that it's like care is a place where men can shed a lot of expectations to be tough. It's really hard to be what is considered masculine today. And masculinity is a very fluid concept over history, right? But what's considered masculine today, which is kind of stoic and tough, it's really hard to do that as a caregiver. There's places for that, like for those traits, but only when they're mixed into everything else, right? I mean, as a caregiver, as a woman and caregiver, I'm also sometimes absolutely stoic and tough with my kids. But if I was only stoic and tough, right, disaster, right? So I think that the care relationship permits men to access a softness, a silliness, a vulnerability, an acceptance of their own weakness, that the own kind of the inevitable dependency that is part of life, that I think men in particular are raised to not just ignore, but resist, right? Yeah. Like to never be dependent on someone is a mark of being a successful man. And it's like when you're caring for someone, it's really hard to maintain that fiction because you see when you're changing anyone's diaper,
right?
It's hard to
very humbling.
Yeah, exactly. Like you're wiping poo-poo out of someone's finish.
It's the great equalizer.
Totally. How can you still live in this myth that we're all so independent and strong, we shouldn't need anybody?
Yeah, I love that. And I have to say, I do a lot of talks with parenting audiences. And what I hear a lot is how dads specifically are struggling with not having that template of being more invested in their relationships with their children. And I see this as a huge strength of our parenting generation right now. There really is a commitment to healthier relationships than in the past. And dads are right there. They're right there with it. And they're kind of looking for that modeling and the template. So it's an important movement.
I think there's been a huge cultural reckoning with this idea that like work won't love you back. And that's something that was always true, but is especially true now. Because people don't stay in the same job for 25 years like previous generations, right? Everyone's moving around. The economy is hectic. So, I'll leave it at that.
That's one word for it.
Yeah. So people don't work. It's not, and then also the rise of like work from home. I was reading something recently about how like in Indiana, they changed the way the courts work. And there used to be a bar that all the lawyers went to after they would see each other all the time. And that just doesn't exist anymore, right? So all these other communities for men too have been taken away. But it does create an opportunity for like the family and care to kind of rise up in importance because that is a group of people that they actually can see. And when they invest in them, it could yield great rewards.
Right. So there's more opportunity than
Right.
ever with the way work is structured in our modern times. So I want to make sure we have time and space for what I know you're very passionate about, which is talking about philosophy. And I never would have thought about philosophy traditions when I think about caregiving, but you present a really fascinating argument for the philosophy of care. So could you explain what that means and why it's so important to consider?
Yeah, absolutely. So in many ways, this book was born because I was sitting next to a distant relative who turns out to be one of like the greats in the care philosophy world, but I hadn't heard of her work so much before. So I happened to be sitting next to her at a family wedding. And, you know, at this time, like I'm writing about motherhood, I'm writing about feminism. So I'm kind of in this space. And she's telling me what she does. And she's talking about dependency. You know, she said, I write about dependency. I write about the social contract through relational lens. And I'm like, I don't even know what any of this quite means, but I'm intrigued. You know, like I am very intrigued. And it's kind of crazy to time travel back when those phrases were so foreign to me. And I've spent, 5 years thinking about them. So intrigued. So I buy her books. They are like academic philosophy books. I am pausing every 3 lines to be like, wait, what? What's this? Like, what's John Rawls? And so like, I never studied philosophy. In fact, I dropped out of philosophy because it seemed like such a clinical and dry way to contemplate the meaning of life. So I'm reading her book, but eventually I'm like, whoa, yes. And it tapped into all that stuff I was talking about at the beginning of like, why does me liking motherhood make me feel so out of step with what's going on in the broader culture, particularly this kind of like literary feminist culture I felt like I was part of. And in Eva Katay's work, I found the answer, right? So I've discovered this whole field of philosophy known as care ethics. It started with the work of Carol Gilligan, who studied child development and development of morality at Harvard with Lawrence Kohlberg. But at some point, she had some questions about his work. For one, he had only studied boys, and in that had decided that girls were less morally developed than boys. So yes, this is the 70s, feminism's in the air. Carol Gilligan has big questions. And then she ends up doing her own research, writing this groundbreaking book called In a Different Voice. And the different voice is this idea that girls don't have inferior sense of morality to boys, newsflash, but they can have a different one because they are raised to think of right and wrong in the context of relationships, not in the context of, I won't say not, but less in the context of universal abstract truths and more in the context of relationships. So she actually was a psychologist by training, but ended up sparking all these writers. My favorite is Nell Noddings, but Eva Katay is one of them. And now there's this great international field of care ethics with conferences all over the world every year. It's actually really growing in the philosophy world. And the real core principles of care ethics is to think, right, this, what I said, that right and wrong, that morality is a process, that figuring out what to do in any given situation really depends on the context and the relationships of the people in it. That sometimes right or wrong is less about, again, some universal principle, whether it's like, am I saving the most lives by doing this, which is kind of like a utilitarian ethic. I think that for a parent, that one's very real. I could always be getting my kids less stuff and sending money to a child who needs it more, but I don't. Right. And one thing care ethicists talk about is like, should we be constantly feeling bad about that? Or is that like a misunderstanding of the care relationship? So it's this real idea that our sense of right or wrong is relational, and also that it's a process. It's ongoing. These are words care ethicists use all the time. Like we're constantly pursuing a sense of right and wrong in our care relationships. It's not a fixed place. And what's so brilliant about care ethics is that instead of making us feel like we're screwing up because we're fluid, it's actually a strength. Like we're actually doing, it should be fluid because like you are a different person moment by moment and your child is a different person moment by moment. And so, I just fell in love with this whole field of study. I really appreciate it to get back to this kind of burning ethical issue of the fact that we give our kids more than we give others. Nell Nodding, so it was she had oh gosh, I'm forgetting, maybe 6, 7 kids. She had a huge station wagon. She was she might have been trad wifey, quote unquote, but also was this badass Stanford professor, such a cool feminist icon, in my opinion, able to not just have quote unquote work-life balance, but to actually take the rich stuff of care and turn it into brilliant thought and a really respectable academic and philosophical career. And one thing she wrote about that I love is this difference between caring for and caring about. And she writes that we can care about a lot of things, right? You can care. I care about a lot of things. I care about all the children suffering in the world, but I can't care for them because those two types of care are not the same. And I think this is where we get in trouble with the way we talk about care in this country or in this world, honestly. And it makes parents feel bad all the time because we kind of lump together all the types of care. We lump together ongoing, intense dependency relationships with just kind of a broader concern for the well-being of others. And in fact, those are two separate buckets of care. They're really they almost could have entirely different words. They're not the same thing, And once we see that ongoing dependency care as its own experience, its own sense of obligations, I think it alleviates a lot of guilt in parents and then also opens up a lot of curiosity because actually it's its own whole experience. I think in our broader sense of caring for, all the children suffering right now, I should sacrifice for them. It's a clear sense of I should give some of my income and help alleviate that. But when it comes to my relationship with my kids, yes, there's some sacrifice, but it can't be only sacrifice because if I myself keep giving, and I'm depleted, then I actually can't fulfill my role to care for them, right? So these philosophers took this to such interesting places where they really went deep into taking, to what it means to care more broadly, to what it means to care specifically for that one and only human in front of you.
That was a lovely summation of really complicated material. You're really good at that.
Yeah.
But no, I find it fascinating. And I think in your book, you really get into more detail about how these kind of feminist philosophers promoting ethic of care were so against the tradition of philosophy, right? It was just such a cutting edge way to even approach philosophy. And
right.
I love, that's what you're doing now with your work is really pushing against norms and looking at the next chapter for our culture.
The classic Broe philosophy kind of denies relationship. It's all just this pursuit of universal truths, totally separate. And this idea that we're all independent, most of Western philosophy sits on this idea that we're all independent, rational beings. And we're not, So what happens when you bring the messiness of human life into philosophy? Interesting things, but it doesn't actually, most traditional philosophy doesn't accommodate the messiness of human life,
Which is why you resisted it and why I've always resisted it, actually. I'm just this doesn't mean much to me in my real life, right?
Right.
This isn't translating. I wish we could keep talking, but we have to wrap up. I picked something that really stood out to me for why your book and today's conversation really matters to the world. And you talk about mattering for people, but this is the messaging that I think really matters. You say, how do we make it so our intimate experiences of care, including all those insights into human dependency, vulnerability, and subjectivity, extend to the wider world and translate to a more caring society? If there's anything I think we're all yearning for right now, it is a more caring society.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Elissa, for all of your work.
Thank you for having me.
Where can people find you?
I'm most active on Substack, and my Substack's called Made with Care. And I kind of hang out on Instagram and LinkedIn sometimes, but I enjoy the conversational vibe of Substack the most. And of course, you can learn a lot more about me and my thoughts on care in my book, When You Care.
Thanks so much for your time today. Thank you, everyone, for sticking around for the co-host post on my conversation with Elissa Strauss about caring. And I'm here with Yael to talk about the talk. So we just chatted a little bit before recording, and I know we have lots of thoughts, so we're just going to jump into it. So Yael, what struck you the most from this conversation?
Well, for folks who have just finished listening to the entire episode, I'll start with the last thing that she talked about that kind of blew my mind, which is this distinction between caring about and caring for. This is a distinction I'd never thought about before. And she said this. She said when people hear this distinction that they feel very freed by it. I definitely had one of those, mind-blown moments where I was like, yes, oh my gosh, I really do feel free. I recently had a neighbor who's retired, who's very politically active, and he sent out an email to our entire neighborhood recognizing that there's a lot of working parents with young kids who are very busy, but that, now is a time where he would have wanted to see us get more politically active. And I was like, he's right, but gosh, I don't know where it'll fit in my calendar, and kind of feeling weighed down by the guilt. And when I heard her make that distinction, it really was freeing to release the guilt and then ask this question of, I can care about it, and then without the guilt, make a more clear-eyed decision about how to care for individuals or the issue itself. So that was just a really helpful distinction.
I completely agree, especially right now with what's happening everywhere. Some communities are facing things much more viscerally right now, including my own, and it can be very difficult to feel like you're doing enough. It never feels like enough. So I think you're right. And I also like to make the connection myself that caring for actually then helps the caring about, because if I'm raising kids in a really intentional way to help them care too, then I'm also raising citizens that will potentially be more active and engaged. So it's not just about the present day. It's about looking forward as well.
Well, I think you're bringing up something that she talks about in a slightly different context, this way of things that we see as being in competition, as being like, it's either this or it's that. And what she talks about is these truths are complicated. Like parenting is both a caregiving is both a sacrifice and incredibly enriching. And how we hold those two truths often finds us wanting to simplify it. No, I want to decide, is it good or is it bad? Is it nurturing or is it a sacrifice? But the reality is it's both. And this really, and you talked a little bit about work-family enrichment and my writing from my book, Work, Parent, Thrive. And it really did strike me how similar it is, because what I talk about extensively in my book is this idea that work-family conflict exists, like our multiple demanding roles are competing for our finite resources, attention, time, energy. And at the same time, the tension between roles can be incredibly enriching. Both are true. And so recognizing that they're both true actually gives us a lot of power to decide how we navigate and try to access more of what we want more of, and minimize or manage more skillfully what we want less of.
Right. And I just want to give a shout out, because I'm realizing as you're talking, you and I have done some co-host intros on very similar content recently. And I think there's a really good threesome. Can I say threesome?
Yeah.
With my recent interview with Corinne Lowe about how to reconceptualize using our time for utility and values. I think that actually ties in to some of what we're talking about in terms of making choices around our caregiving. And your recent interview with Jennifer Wallace about her new book on mattering.
Yeah, the interview with Jenny Wallace that just was released last week is maybe one for people who just heard this episode to go back to, because this idea of mattering really comes through in your conversation with Elissa and how important it is. And Jenny goes deep into the science and the practice of how we help people and including ourselves, to feel like they matter in this super complicated world. And that sometimes the move towards mattering is both something that we sacrifice and get a lot out of. Give and we receive. They go hand in hand.
And okay, now I'm going to make another leap between these authors and books, and that is if we can reconceptualize the way we spend our time as worthy, even if it's not earning money, and we can reconceptualize our caregiving roles as enriching and valuable, we feel like we matter more. Like even our own self-concept, we feel like we matter more.
I do think that kind of gets to Elissa's central thesis, which is that, part of the movement towards saying that it is that women have the right, and I think this is great, to work and to contribute out in the community, had this unintended effect of minimizing and sort of diminishing the value of caregiving.
Yeah.
And what she's trying to do, and what I know you're trying to do in your work and your writing and speaking, is to really highlight that they're not mutually exclusive. Like contributing out in the world, going to protests, making a living through your work, doing talks, like being a public figure and sort of contributing in this public outside of the house way, wonderful. And we all should have the right to do that. And we all should find a lot of value in doing that. And the stuff that is more private inside of our homes, that is caregiving, that doesn't equate to earned income, also matters. And so if we can see that and really honor that, we have more access to mattering. We have more access, as you said, to like self-confidence and self-value. And it's just true.
Right. Well, I hope listeners get a lot out of these several episodes. And I would love to hear from anyone who has more thoughts. Thanks so much, Yael.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. You can now listen to our podcast ad-free by becoming a supporter on Patreon. You can link to Patreon on our website or go to patreon.com/offtheclocksite.
If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review and sharing this episode with a friend or an enemy who would enjoy it.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our fabulous newsletter on Substack. Or if you're still addicted to social media, find us on Instagram and LinkedIn.
We'd like to thank our rockstar production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
Now for the boring part. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.